I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house and welcome back to our rattle through the horror anthology movies of Amicus Productions. We've reached Tales from the Crypt, directed by Freddie Francis, with producer Milton Subotsky back on script writing duties, this time taking as his source material the EC Horror Comics Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror. The opening credits are filmed at Highgate Cemetery in London, and you'll have seen this particular location in certainly Taste the Blood of Dracula, a couple of Hammer movies I think, and I think we'll be returning again in Amicus land in From Beyond the Grave. It's a wonderful setting. You can take tours around there. I have myself. They don't talk about the horror movies that were filmed there, but we all know. We join a group taking a guided tour around this cemetery, and whilst they're in the catacombs there, wouldn't you know it, a few of them lose their way, become lost in the Warren-like tunnels, and then find themselves split off from the group, facing Ralph Richardson in the form of the Crypt Keeper, who proceeds to tell all of them their fates one by one. We're on very familiar ground here. Can you guess the twist ending? The first segment is called All Through the House and is quite a classic little Christmas-themed horror. It got adapted again for the Tales from the Crypt TV series. Within the film, the segment stars Joan Collins in her strange little horror movie period in her career before she goes on to her second career peak in Dynasty. It's set on Christmas Eve and she kills her husband for the life insurance money while their daughter is supposed to be asleep upstairs but can't sleep because she's too excited about Santa Claus coming. And on the radio, wouldn't you know it, there's an escaped psychotic lunatic from the nearby asylum roaming the countryside dressed as Santa Claus. Is he going to turn up here at our house while she's trying to dispose of the body and commit the perfect crime? What do you think? There is only one real aesthetic downside to this segment, and that is the blisteringly obvious poster paint used to stand in for blood. If they'd have used something that looked a little bit more blood-like, I would suggest this would be a chef's kiss perfect segment. The Christmas hymns playing throughout on the radio in the background, A, give it a real Christmassy feel, and B, just make the mood really eerie. What we're seeing on screen really jars with the hymns, and that dissonance between what we're seeing and what we're hearing really works. It really sets things on edge. That bright blood across all the sort of white, almost untouched, sort of unlived in, very shiny, glitzy, very modern for the time interior decoration is another stark contrast. If the blood had looked better, that effect would have been fantastic. It's a brilliant little setup. It's a classic little Christmas set horror story. Joan Collins does really well in, again, it's becoming a staple of these films, a mainly dialogue-free performance where she's acting and reacting. And the payoff at the end just ties this little, if you'll forgive the metaphor, this little gift of a segment, just ties it up in a nice little Christmassy bow. It's so close to perfection. The second story is called Reflections of Death, and we join a man just as he's leaving his family to go on a business trip. We find that the business trip is actually him leaving town with his girlfriend to go and set up in a flat they've put a deposit on, and they're going to move in together. Boo, you suck. On the way to there, I believe it's called a love nest, they have an accident. The car flips over, and from that point on, the rest of the segment is filmed from his point of view after he's flung from the vehicle and then has to, on foot, try and make his way back home. It's another sort of classic little story about someone being punished for their transgressions, and while on the journey home you may guess what's going on. I still think that the segment is punchy. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It's nasty. The reveal is shot in such a way that visually it's actually a really nice shock as well. And then a final little twist of the knife at the end, which I think is down to Subotsky's love of Dead of Night and the time loop frameworking of that. We have a nice little time loop in effect as well. It feels like, and this might be with hindsight, that because these stories are based on comic strips, and comic strips rarely, when they work, have very much fat in them, the narrative is very lean in comics, that both of these segments themselves are lean, that set up the dilemma, just get to the point and bang you with an ending. It's working really well. The third story is called Poetic Justice, and it feels like this story is given a little bit more room to breathe, but that's all to the good because it gives our dear friend Peter Cushing a little bit more room to weave his magic. Cushing plays Mr. Grimsdyke, an old, tatty local man who has half a dozen stray dogs that he's saved and is looking after in his front yard, who finds broken toys and fixes them up and gives them to the local kids. Essentially, all the local kids love him. He's a kindly, dear, sweet old man who happens to have got up the noses of his neighbours across the road because they're very keeping up with the Joneses and they think that he's old and he's dirty and he's bringing the house prices down in the neighbourhood. These might be, this father and son pairing, the most despicable characters in any of these Amicus anthology movies. They start what is essentially a hate campaign against Grimsdyke with the intention of driving him from the neighbourhood, but it's a hate campaign that ultimately leads to his suicide, and it is awful. They get his dogs taken away, they have him lose his job, they have him lose his pension, and one Valentine's Day, this awful son fakes Valentine cards from the whole of the neighbourhood to Mr. Grimsdyke, telling him that he's better off out of here. Everyone will be happier if he just went away. In a way, it's quite preposterous, but it's also, because of the way Peter Cushing plays Mr. Grimsdyke, incredibly heartbreaking. Grimsdyke is a widower. Cushing is clearly drawing on the personal grief he still holds for the loss of his wife. It's a very affecting scene where Grimsdyke tries through scrying to reach the spirit of his deceased wife. In that little segment, you can actually see the tarot cards from Dr. Terror's House of Horrors on the table. This segment is just another testament to how good Peter Cushing is. And I know I'm sounding like a stuck record with these, but if you think about how empathetic, how warm and kindly you feel towards his character of Grimsdyke, how you don't want harm to come to him. Each time you watch this segment, you want it to end in a different way. Then think about how you feel for him as Van Helsing in the Hammer movies, this swashbuckling action man of intelligence and science and morality, compared to the depths of depravity he plumbs as Baron Frankenstein in the Frankenstein movies, all the way through to the ultimate space Nazi in Star Wars. Peter Cushing can make you hate him and he can make you love him. Grimsdyke's fate is horrible, but it is sealed. And as much as we feel for him, that makes the revenge from beyond the grave that much more delicious. And we end with a final shocking image that I can't help, and again this might be hindsight, I can't help but feel it's ripped directly from the final shocking panel of the comic story from the original EC Comics, a sort of visual exclamation mark to end the story. The fourth story is called Wish You Were Here, and it deals with a ruthless businessman who's made a few wrong deals and is now facing bankruptcy and must sell everything he owns. He and his wife, this formerly well-to-do couple, are going through their belongings and come across a statue that they bought in Hong Kong and notice that there's an inscription on it that they've never read before, which says that the statue will grant the owner 3 wishes, but it comes with a warning. It's a classic riff on the monkey's paw, and it's a setup. Ever since the monkey's paw, you get wishes, but the wishes come at a price. It's a setup that's been done a lot. What I like about this particular segment is it's a monkey's paw story, but the characters know the story of the monkey's paw and are aware of the dangers and pitfalls, but still, in trying to avoid those pitfalls, they come across pitfalls of their own. The way these wishes come true is extremely nasty. They get nastier and nastier and nastier, even culminating with a cameo by the disembodied hand from Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and a strange cameo of death on a motorbike, which seems to almost be riffing on Jean Cocteau's Orphée, of all things. This segment also features, as an added horror, what has to be the ugliest interior decoration of all time. The final story is called Blind Alleys, and again, this is a story that's given room to breathe. Perhaps I could have done with this one being tightened up a little bit more. It deals with an ex-army colonel who takes over a home for blind people, but he decides that he's going to run it like a military man, and he's going to cut costs. He cuts their heating, he cuts their food bill, so they go from eating meat to eating gruel. It's really quite terrible. It takes an awful lot of the money for himself. He's living a high life in a very warm and fancy office with 3-course meals, and quite understandably, the people living at this care home take umbrage to it, but they can't do anything because he has this attack dog, extremely faithful by his side, and anytime any of them confront him, he threatens them back with this dog. Well, the people of the care home aren't going to take it, and they band together with what limited resources they have to create a punishment for this colonel, and it really is quite a doozy. It's very nasty. It's a strangely seeming precursor to the Saw movies, of all things. Horror stalwart Patrick McGee leads this band of plucky old men, and the ending really is quite satisfying. And so we get to the ending. Our 5 are gathered in stunned silence as the crypt keeper has read them all their fates. What could this possibly mean? What lessons might we learn? Is there a way to... Now, they're all dead. Of course they're all dead. They're always all dead. They're always all dead. I'm beginning to wonder if we're all already dead, and this is some kind of weird Amicus purgatory. This particular anthology really benefits from being based on comic book stories. If I remember way back to the first film we looked at, Dr. Terrible's House of Horrors, I said that film had the feeling of reading through a stack of horror comics, and here we are, the absolute apotheosis of that feeling. And it's not the last time that Subbotze is going to use these comics as source material, but that is for another time.